We are live on Facebook, and so Alok, our managing partner, is not able to join the webinar today. So I'll be taking it forward, and we have a presentation on this. So for any queries, you can put your queries in the chat box. We'll take up the questions and queries at the end of the presentation, and we are also live on Facebook. So people watching us on Facebook Live can put their questions on the comment box, and we'll take it up at the end of the presentation. So why does an Indian entrepreneur, they would want to set up entities outside India? What are the concerns and challenges which they face in India? What are the things, or maybe for what benefits they would want to set up outside India? So there are business and commercial reasons for which they would want to set up outside India. They want to tap the global market, customers outside India, uh, tap the resources, consultants and vendors available outside India, get access to global investors, better IP protection and validity, and better infrastructure facilities. Apart from that, entrepreneurs, they also want to go outside India and set up their business for ease of doing business, fundraise and exit after the fundraise, efficient and better tax structures if available, efficient regulatory requirements, ease of capital flow, inflows and outflows of funds from and within the country, and stability in the tax laws, and low incidence of withholding taxes. So these are the certain reasons why a person would want to set up their business outside India and expand globally. Being a digital entrepreneur in India, there are certain compliances which one has to go through. We'll have a look at that. So mainly digital entrepreneurs in India, when they want to make foreign payments, if they have foreign vendors, foreign suppliers, freelancers whom they are dealing with, they have to undergo the withholding taxes, TDS compliances, uh, and there is Form 15 CACB related compliances, which is attached to each and every payment which is done outside India. So any foreign payment which a business person does for his business expense outside India, whether they do it through their debit or credit card, whether they do it through internet banking or wire transfer, by whatever mode the payment is done, maybe they use payment gateways like PayPal, these 15 CA compliance, 15 CACB compliance and withholding taxes compliances are there. We have seen many instances where many companies and businesses in India, they link the corporate credit card or the personal credit card of the directors for certain foreign payments, and the amount gets auto debited over there. And they are of the view that no further compliance is required because no one asked for any further documents. However, if you book those expenses as a business expense, there are severe penalties and non-compliances involved. Each and every foreign payment has to undergo the 15 CACB compliance and withholding tax compliance in India. Because in India, the tax liability, even if income is deemed to accrue or arise, irrespective of the residential status of the person receiving it, is taxable in India. For example, if there is a freelancer whom you are involving, or a blogger you are involving, a content writer you are involving, who's sitting in the US, sitting in the Europe, sitting in the Middle East, they, even if the payments are made to them, the withholding tax requirements arises. So there are many countries where the taxation is determined based on the place where which the services are provided. So for instance, in US, if you are not residing in the US, there are very less chances that you will be, if you are not a citizen of US and if you are not doing your business or profession from US, then there are less chances that they would be taxing you directly. However, in India, even if you are not residing in US and your income is accruing or arising in India, its source is being generated from India, the Indian tax authorities, as per the Income Tax Act, as liable to tax them and hence the withholding tax compliances, they do arise. Similarly, there is a GST of 18% on all import of services, which has to be paid in case of any imports of services. It's determined on the place of provision of service rules, but in most of the cases, the import of services does attract 18% GST under the reverse charge. Then for online advertisement, for selling of time slots, for e-commerce, there is a concept of equalization levy, wherein if there are foreign parties involved and online payment have to be done for online advertisement, 6% equalization levy has to be paid to the government, and there are required filings. Then even the inflows and outflows of funds are through the banks. We have to provide the details, and it is reported to the RBI on a regular basis. So all inflows and outflows does goes through some kind of a scrutiny. Then because of certain amendments, even capital gain arising out of assets which are transacted between two foreign parties outside India, and if the asset being transacted, the shares of the company being transacted, if they have India connection, still the capital gain is taxable in India. So even if two foreign parties change hands and do a transaction of share transfer between themselves outside India, and the, none of the parties are Indian parties, still if the underlying asset, if the underlying company has an India connection, there is a tax liability which does comes. So these are certain things which does uh, become a reason for entrepreneurs to move outside India and avoid these uh, implications of taxes. However, when you are setting up outside India, there are even more stringent things available, and things have to be kept in mind, and proper structure and planning has to be carried out when you want to set up outside India, be it a holding subsidiary structure, be it a foreign wholly owned subsidiary, be it individually owned resident individuals holding entities outside India. There are certain aspects and different tax laws and regulatory laws which has to be kept in mind before we set up and start transacting through our foreign entities. So we'll go through those items. So first is the FEMA and the RBI laws. Any money going outside India from India has to undergo the RBI, the FEMA Act and the RBI related compliances and reporting. Then the Indian Income Tax Act, they have specific anti-avoidance rules. For instance, there are transfer pricing laws which mandates that any transaction between two related enterprises, international transaction with related enterprises, they have to be at an arm's length price, and transfer pricing laws have to be complied with. There is a transfer pricing audit, transfer pricing related documentation, and study reports of industry benchmarking has to be maintained so as to ensure that the transactions happen at a arm's length price with a reasonable profit margin. Then there are a double taxation avoidance agreement which India has entered into with more than 90 countries. So the taxability of the transactions between two entities, one in India and one outside India, has to be studied from this angle also, so that we are on the right side of the law, be it in the foreign country in which we are incorporated or be it Indian tax laws. So double taxation avoidance agreement and their review becomes an important aspect. Then there are rules related to place of effective management. If there are, if you are holding foreign entities and the place of effective management in those entities is considered or deemed to be in India, then the Indian government, the Indian tax department, they have jurisdiction over such entities and they can make it taxable in India. Then there are general anti-avoidance rule apart from transfer pricing and the specific anti-avoidance rules, which is part of the Income Tax Act and other tax laws. There are general anti-avoidance rules which have been created to keep a check on larger money laundering and tax avoidance, wherein the structures are created to keep profit out of India and not pay taxes in India. So a proper structure and proper planning from the GAR perspective is also which one should be doing before going ahead and setting up outside India. And then, of course, the rules and regulations of the country where investment is being made, that is something which has to be analyzed and seen. So from the, we'll see the FEMA and RBI compliances. So any direct investment outside India means investment either under the automatic route or the approval route. So the Indian government, the foreign direct policy of India, they allows certain sectors and certain, especially certain sectors and certain persons, they allow the investments to be made outside India under the automatic route where no prior approval is required. Only reporting is required, and we can report and do the filing with the RBI and go ahead with the investment through the ODI route, overseas direct investment. And the other route is the approval route, wherein a specific RBI approval, government approval has to be taken before making an investment outside India. Also, on purchase of existing shares of a foreign entity, either by market purchase or through private placement or through stock exchanges, the overseas direct investment related reportings with the RBI is required. Mostly these reportings happen through the authorized dealer bank through which the share capital money or the purchase price is sent outside India. A foreign entity normally is termed as a joint venture of the Indian party or resident individuals when there are other foreign promoters holding the stake along with the Indian party. So when there are more than one shareholders involved, it's mostly from the FEMA and RBI perspective is termed as a joint venture entity. And if 100% or almost the whole of the shareholding of the foreign company is owned by a resident individual or group of resident individuals or by an Indian company, then it is called a wholly owned subsidiary or a WOS. So for resident individuals, when a resident individual resident in India, so if he or she has to make an investment outside India or purchase equity outside India through the overseas direct investment route, then the RBI has this for resident individuals, they have this liberalized remittance scheme, LRS, under which the investments can be made. So this is a scheme brought in by the Reserve Bank of India, and there is a limit of 250,000 US dollars per financial year under the LRS route. So any investment which is up to this financial year limit of 250,000 USD, it gets covered under the LRS route and no specific approval is required. And this LRS route can be used for investment in shares, in debt instruments, in purchasing immovable properties in overseas market, and individuals can open and maintain the foreign currency accounts with banks outside India and for carrying out transactions permitted under the LRS scheme. This money can also be used to pay expenses related to the travel, be it private or business, for medical treatment, for studying, gifts and donations, maintenance of close relatives, and so on. So the thing is that this $250,000 limit is for the individual in India. So whatever expenses are there, including equity investment or buying out equity in foreign entities, making investments, be it in form of debt or equity, and all other expenses in under the capital account or current account, which a person can do, be it travel, be it medical, be it studies, gift, donation. So everything inclusive, this is a upper limit of $250,000 per financial year. So all the expenses which a person does under the LRS scheme, uh, has to be within this limit. And it can also be used for making investments in equity and buying shares. So this was the limit for the resident individuals for making an investment outside India. Similarly, there is a limit prescribed by the RBI for entities who want to set up foreign subsidiaries or joint ventures. And for these entities, the limit set is 400% of the net worth of the Indian party as per the last audited balance sheet under the automatic route. So with effect from July 3, 2014, it has been decided that any financial commitment exceeding USD 1 billion or equivalent in the financial year would require prior approval of the RBI. So if investment amount exceeds 1 billion, uh, even if the net worth is, even if it is within the 400% net worth limit, then also approval is required. Otherwise, under the automatic route, for up to 400% of the net worth of the Indian party is what is allowed for the Indian entities to make investment outside India under the automatic route. Anything above that will require prior approval of the RBI. Also, RBI has restricted Indian parties and Indian entities to uh, create a step down subsidiary. So, any Indian party, Indian entities who set up foreign entities outside India, be it a wholly owned subsidiary or a joint venture, directly or indirectly, so they are not allowed to create a step down subsidiary. So step down subsidiary means the Indian entity forming a foreign subsidiary joint venture, and then the foreign subsidiary joint venture again creating a step down subsidiary, further subsidiary is not allowed. So usually these entities which are to be set up outside India, they should be operational entities. They should be a business entity carrying out actual business and not just holding companies. And they should not create further step down subsidiaries from that route. And the RBI also restricts round tripping. So Indian funds going as equity outside India and coming back to India again by way of a foreign direct investment, money going outside India as ODI investment and coming back into India as FDI investment. That is also something which is restricted by the RBI. So RBI restricts both step down subsidiary and round tripping, and it should be ideally avoided, and any structure created uh, developed to create foreign entities, these two very important things have to be kept in mind in all the at all the times. Moving ahead, there are certain specific anti-avoidance rules which are there whenever we are dealing with our related foreign entities. These rules have to be kept in mind, and they are part of the existing laws. They are part of the Income Tax Act. They are part of the FEMA Act. So one of the most important thing from the transfer pricing, from the income tax perspective, is transfer pricing. So Indian tax laws applies to all India tax residents, and global income of resident Indians are taxed in India. And the transfer pricing rules are based on global practices, and mostly it's standard across different countries. And considering both the countries is very important whenever a transfer pricing structure is created and transfer pricing agreements and documentation are created. We have to see it from the perspective of both the countries which are involved. Uh, so from the tax laws of both the countries in which the two entities, related entities, are situated, the the structure of transfer pricing has to be seen and then accordingly planned. So as we discussed earlier, the idea is to carry out transactions at an arm's length price as an uncontrolled environment. So if it were two unrelated entities, two uncontrolled transaction happening between two unrelated entities, what kind of profit margin the entities would have kept, what kind of transactional conditions would have been kept. Uh, Ideally, in when the transactions are happening between two related enterprise, that independence and uncontrolled, uh, the profitability of the uncontrolled environment should be tried and maintained as much as possible. So that is the whole objective of transfer pricing. And in India, the transfer pricing becomes applicable for all international transactions with associated enterprises. And the definition of associated enterprises is very wide. So if there is a significant control over if one entity has significant control over other entity, mainly from a shareholding perspective, it is if it is 26% or more shareholding control of one entity over another entity, if the same person is having more than 26% or more stake in both the entities which are transacting, then also it becomes associated enterprise. If 90% or more of the sale or purchase of one entity is from the another associated enterprise, then also it gets covered under the definition. Use of same brand, use of same know-how and intellectual property, these things also trigger the two entities to be called as associated enterprise. And all international transaction with associated enterprises gets covered under the transfer pricing laws, and they have to follow the transfer pricing related rules and regulations. One more important aspect is checking the risk of creation of permanent establishment. So again, permanent establishment is a global concept, and from an India perspective, if there is a foreign entity which has a permanent establishment in India, normally foreign entities, they are taxed at a higher income tax rate of 40%. So any business done through the permanent establishment of a foreign entity is also taxed at a 40% rate in India. So any Indian subsidiary or holding company, if it gets covered under the definition of permanent establishment, being a permanent establishment of the foreign entity, it runs into a risk of being taxed at 40% rate for all its India income also. So this is also something which has to be planned, and there are various ways in which the structures are created, uh, wherein to see if we actually want a permanent establishment to be created in India or not. And whenever there are international transactions with associated enterprise, transfer pricing becomes applicable, and along with that, transfer pricing audit also becomes applicable. So a chartered accountant's report in Form 3 CEB has to be filed in all such cases without any monetary threshold limit. And above a certain limit of value of international transactions with associated enterprises, there are transfer pricing documentation which has to be maintained. There is industry benchmarking which has to be done. Agreements, working papers, and communication trails all have to be maintained. Then coming to the next point, it's double taxation avoidance agreement, which India has with various countries. So that is something which has to be kept in mind when we are structuring and creating foreign entities from India. So India has double taxation avoidance agreement with close to 90 countries in the world, and the Income Tax Act and DTAA, whichever is more beneficial for a taxpayer, usually that is something which is applied, and the Indian taxpayer can take benefit of the two laws, and whichever is more beneficial, he can apply that. Then tax residency certificate or certificate of corporate residency is something very important for claiming any benefit of the double taxation avoidance agreement which India has with various countries. So if you are an Indian party and you want to take double taxation avoidance agreement, you should have a tax residency certificate from Indian tax authorities. And if you are a foreign party and you want to take the double taxation avoidance agreement benefit, the foreign party should have a tax residency certificate or certificate of residency, whatever it is called in its country of incorporation. From the respective tax authority, it should take it. Most of the countries, they do provide tax residency certificate or certificate of corporate residency. However, there are certain countries who do not have the concept. In those cases, other documents are considered as a valid documentation for this purpose. And in general, all the to avoid the double taxation avoidance agreements have been created to avoid double taxation, as the name suggests. So if there has been a withholding tax in one country, or if the taxes have been paid in one country and it's required to be reported in another country, and if other country also wants to tax it, then under the double taxation avoidance agreement, the credit is available in the country of residence of the person who wants to claim the benefit. They can, in their country of residence, they can claim the benefit of the taxes which they have paid in jurisdiction outside their country of residence. So if Indian company, for them, if there is a withholding tax which has happened in the US or in the UK, then in India, while filing their personal income tax, they can claim the benefit under the DTAA, and they'll get the credit of the taxes paid in the US to be offset against the tax liability in India. So there are certain conditions associated with it, but in general, this is something which is available, and benefit of this can be taken. However, if there are any avoidance of tax which is unearthed and under the specific anti-avoidance rules or under the general anti-avoidance rules, if it is found that certain structure has been created to just avoid the taxes, then the treaty benefit can also be denied as per the agreements, and that is called a limitation of benefit, and that should also be kept in mind while planning and structuring in cross-border transactions and multi-country entities. Then there is this concept of place of effective management under the Income Tax Act. So entities which are situated outside India, which have been incorporated outside India, and if the key management and commercial decisions that are necessary for conduct of business of such entities, if they are wholly or substantially made in India, then the place of effective management can be considered to be in India for such entity. And if place of effective management is considered in India, then the Indian tax laws applies to that entity, and the profit and income of that entity can be taxed by the Indian tax authorities. The Income Tax Act, by way of various rules and circulars issued from time to time, have set out a series of tests and subtests to determine the applicability of POEM, which is place of effective management. And based on these tests, it has to be determined whether a company has active business outside India or not. If it has active business outside India, it gets exemption from the POEM related rules. And an important aspect is that POEM related rules becomes applicable for entities who have 50 crore turnover or more in a particular year. So smaller entities, they don't need to worry about POEM who have not reached 50 crore INR turnover limit. However, if your entity outside India is reaching that limit, this particular structuring is very much required. We'll have to see if the place of effective management is in India or not in India. If it comes out to be in India, then it has to be structured so that it can be it can avoid the POEM related complications. Otherwise, they'll have to end up paying the normal taxes if the effective management is found to be in India. Then, as we were discussing, there are general anti-avoidance rules under the income tax laws, and The general anti-avoidance rule, it was for a long time deferred. The law was introduced quite a few years back. However, the implementation was delayed. But as of now, the GAR related laws are applicable and they are in force. And the this is again part of the Income Tax Act and Income Tax laws, and the GAR related provisions, they define impermissible avoidance arrangements, IAA. And if a particular arrangement or a particular structure gets covered under IAA, then it can enable the tax authorities, among other things, to recharacterize such arrangements and deny tax benefits or treaty benefits to curb any means of tax avoidance. So GAR and specific anti-avoidance rules, they both shall coexist. So the tax authorities are free to apply any of them. And the main purpose of identifying impermissible avoidance arrangements is that the structure should not be such that it has been created just with the sole objective of obtaining tax benefits. So usually the trigger comes when an arrangement transaction is for the following. So the transactions are not done at arm's length price, and the due profit and taxes of Indian government, Indian Revenue Department is not, and the tax provisions which are misused. So it may not be outrightly illegal. However, the loopholes or the provisions are misused in such a way that it would lead to lower tax incidence. And there is a lack of commercial substance, which means that any structure which has not been created for commercial sense from a commercial perspective, but only from a tax saving perspective. So if you create a Singapore entity, for instance, and the objective of that entity is to expand in Southeast Asia market, or its objective is to raise an investment fund, and the investor wants to invest only in a Singapore entity, uh, or if the entity is being used for global expansion. So there is a commercial substance. So when there is a commercial substance in your structuring, it does not attract GAR related rules. However, for instance, you choose a tax haven and you don't have any particular business reason to go in that tax haven, and just to move the profit out from the India entity, you create a tax haven, and you don't pay any taxes over there, you accumulate your funds over there. So it's a capital base erosion which happens, wherein the actual Indian profits and on which the Indian government would have earned taxes are parked somewhere else, and without having any commercial connection for doing so, it usually gets covered under the GAR related laws. And the last one is that, yeah, it's created for not for a bona fide purpose, with a sole objective of avoiding taxes and misusing the tax provisions. However, there are certain financial limit in applicability of GAR related laws also. So any arrangement will not be considered as a impermissible arrangement under the GAR if the aggregate tax benefit in a year to all the parties does not exceed INR 30 million or rupees 3 crore. If any arrangement which has in total, the whole arrangement has not avoided tax of rupees 3 crore or more, the GAR related provisions shall not be invoked by the tax department. If it's a approved investment by FIIs in listed and unlisted securities, and benefit not claimed under tax treaty, then also it shall not be invoked. Investment by non-resident in FII by way of derivative instrument, GAR should not be invoked. And income from transfer of investment made before 1st April 2017. So if the arrangement was related to 1st April 2017 or before, then also GAR related provisions shall not be invoked. Moving forward, we'll quickly discuss the concept of tax havens and modern corporate tax jurisdictions. So there are traditional tax havens which are now very less in number, and they have like close to zero rate of taxation. They don't have any income tax. They don't have any corporate tax. For example, the Cayman Islands, the Bermuda Island, British Virgin Island, Jersey, and the Isle of Man. And these tax havens, the traditional tax havens, they maintain a certain level of secrecy, and they have very restricted bilateral tax treaties with most of the countries around the world who are tax jurisdictions. Uh, and in contrast, there are modern corporate tax havens. So these are not traditional tax havens, but like they are not zero tax rate entities. However, their tax rates are lower than what usually countries charge. However, these modern corporate tax havens, they maintain a high level of transparency. There is no secrecy involved, and they are in OECD guidelines compliance, and they have a broad network of bilateral tax treaties with most of the countries around the globe. And like examples of such countries are Singapore, Ireland, Netherlands. So these countries, the modern corporate tax havens, they are in compliance, and they are not restricted by most of the countries around the world. Rather, they have become a financial hub and financial business centers. So in the year 2000, OECD has blacklisted 30 nations because of secrecy and non-sharing of data. And then over a period of 10 years or so, the list of blacklisted countries became zero. So most of the countries are now bound to bring in VAT, GST, corporate taxes, and share information with each other. The number of countries who are considered traditional tax havens, they are continuously and uh, quickly going down, and the countries are rather turning into modern corporate tax havens so that they maintain a level of transparency and still attract investments and businesses. So in current day, it always makes sense that one if anyone has to set up entity, it should ideally be in modern corporate tax havens and not the traditional tax havens, because with time, again, things are going to be worse for the traditional tax havens with the changing laws around the globe, and most of the countries are avoiding transacting with such countries. And rather, the financial hubs like Singapore's and Ireland's and Netherlands uh, are much better option with all the compliances and better ease of doing business and IP protection laws. So we'll quickly discuss why Singapore is a preferred destination for many entrepreneurs and investors, and we'll also quickly look through the US. Uh, we deal in setting up and handling businesses from various countries. However, because of paucity of times, we are quickly just going through Singapore and US. So Singapore has a well-developed economy backed by a strong financial system, and the process of registration there is very minimum. So minimal documents are required, no notary or apostillation is required, self-attestation is enough, and the registration also requires a very short time frame. And it gives a strategic and geographical locational advantage. Infrastructure is world class, and we have a well-functioning government that is free from red tapeism or corruption, and robust startup ecosystem is there, and low tax and interest rate are there. However, there are certain compliances in Singapore which has to be kept in mind, and they are different from what we have in India. So there is a requirement of a local resident director. The company must have a local resident director all the time. It should have a company secretary appointed and have a registered address. Then there are annual filings of income tax returns with the IRAS, which is Income Tax Department equivalent in Singapore. Then there is annual filings with the ACRA, which is again MCA and ROC equivalent of Singapore. Then filing of estimated chargeable income related taxes there, which is similar to advanced tax in India. Uh, Singapore has GST. If the local Singapore revenue exceeds 1 million Singaporean dollar in a financial year, GST registration and compliance is required. It has a flat 7% GST. However, revenue earned as exports, which is from outside Singapore, is out from the purview of GST. And audit appointment of auditor is not mandatory over there. So if you are a small company or a small group which does not have a revenue exceeding 10 million Singapore dollar, or if the number of employees are less than 50 in the company or in the group, or if the total assets of the company or the group doesn't exceed Singapore dollar 10 million, you're not required to get yourself audited. If these threshold, any two of these threshold is crossed, then audit becomes mandatory, and one has to appoint auditor, independent auditor, and go through the audit compliance as per the Singapore Companies Act and also as per the IFRS. So, yeah, Singapore, as it is one of the modern corporate tax haven. So it's not zero, it does not have a nil tax, but it has a flat 17% corporate tax rate. And in first few years of incorporation, there are some exemptions allowed every year in the budget. So effective tax rate comes to be lower than the 17% rate. 17% is the highest rate. The corporate losses can be carried forward, and the tax laws in Singapore does not have the concept of taxing capital gains or dividend payouts. So these taxes are not there, and the GST is flat 7%. Similarly, for individuals, it has a progressive personal tax rate based on various slabs, starting from 0% going up to 22%. 22% or more, 22% is taxed when the annual salary income or revenue of the individual exceeds 320,000 Singaporean dollar in a year. If it is less than 320,000 Singaporean dollar, the effective tax rate is much lower than 22%. At times, it's in the range of 6 to 12%, the effective tax rate. And NRIs, they are like taxed at a 15% rate. Moving to the advantages of the United States, or why people usually go to the United States and set up over there. So the customer and market reach, many businesses in India see US as a major market, a customer base, and especially the tech companies in India, tech company, analytical company, AI and big data companies, they prefer US, and they try to tap the large market over there. Many companies, they go to raise funds over there. US also has a very developed and grown up investor market and a startup ecosystem. So investor reach out is a reason why people incorporate in the US. The taxes have been reduced of late in the US. The US has a concept of separate federal tax, which is the central government tax, and state taxes. So rate of federal tax is 21% as of now, and state taxes depends upon the nexus. It can be a physical nexus or economic nexus, depending upon the sales address, physical address, and where the payroll is run. And for state taxes, there are different state laws applicable to different states. And depending upon respective state laws, state taxes are determined, and also the nexus is determined. So the total, out of the total revenue earned by a US entity, whichever state the nexus is determined, according to the nexus and particular law of that particular state, that state taxes are determined. Then there are social security related registrations and expenses which are required to be done. Entities like corporations are of two types. They are C Corp and S Corp. So S Corp requires local citizens as their shareholders. So for foreign shareholders, C Corp is the best entity. And they also have this option of limited liability companies, and when foreigners can also open limited liability companies in the US. However, the limited liability companies are similar to partnership firms in LLP in India, and they are pass-through entities wherein the taxability comes to the partners or the beneficial owners. So if you are a Indian resident and you create a LLC, the taxability of the LLC would come in the hands of the partner, which will require both US reporting, filing, and maybe payment of taxes. And India, uh, it will also be considered as a part of India taxes and Indian income. We have double taxation avoidance agreement to take care of such situation, but yeah, additional compliance requirements would be there. So ideally, C Corp are the best suggested entities for setup in the US, which is a private limited company equivalent, and foreign shareholders and foreign 100% foreign shareholders and directorship, 100% foreign directorship can be done for a C Corp in the US. So Delaware is a state in the US which many Indians know, and they prefer a Delaware setup. So the reason being easy setup and investor friendly norms in the state of Delaware. And then there are no state taxes for income which a Delaware entity earns from outside the state, including export revenue. So any income earned by a Delaware incorporated company which is not generated from the customers situated in the Delaware state. So it can be from any other state in the United States, or it can be export revenue also. So in those situations, Delaware does not charge any state taxes. So you can just pay federal taxes and stay incorporated in Delaware. However, if your revenue has nexus to other states, if you are earning revenue from significant revenue from, say, California, then even if you are a Delaware incorporated entities, California may require a local California registration and payment of taxes, California state taxes. So those have to be determined based on the case-to-case basis and the kind of revenue the US entity is earning. Why many people they avoid US incorporation is the complex federal and state structure, as we were discussing. Nexus from different states have to be determined, and on a state to state basis, based on the local laws, we have to see the taxability of the state taxes, registration requirements. So it has a complex federal and state structure, and state-wise registration and compliance requirements are there. If state taxes are applicable, then the effective tax rate becomes much higher, of 21% federal plus it could be in the range of 4, 5 to maybe 12, 13% state taxes. So effective tax rate would be high, and compliance cost is also higher because of applicable state laws. There may be compliances required in different states if you are operating from the US. Capital gains and dividend taxes are also applicable in the US. Mostly the companies they would go to US only if they have a market outreach over there, and they have to make or already have a customer base in the US, or as we discussed, if there are investors wanting to invest in the entity, the person would want to go to the US. So yeah, I think that's it for the presentation today. So yeah, because of paucity of time, we went through the things a bit quickly, and there are all these compliances which we were discussing related to foreign setup. All these are issues which involves a lot of deliberation and discussion, and on a case-to-case basis, it has to be seen. So we have just covered the broader aspects. However, the the specific issues has to be seen on a case-to-case basis, and the point we are trying to make is that whenever we are trying to set up outside India, these 6 things is what we should usually analyze and structure before going ahead and set up, because we see in many cases like someone is traveling to the US and they'll just use their credit card to set up a US entity through some of the vendors who do it really quick, and then at a later stage they get to know that there are so many compliances which they have ignored, or later on they end up paying penalties. We have seen small US based company end up paying 10,000 USD of penalty just for not filing their income tax return or for not filing the state return. So one has to be very, very careful before setting up an entity outside India, and we have to structure and plan it in a very good way so that FEMA and RBI laws are not uh, contravened. And from other perspective also, we are in compliance. So there could be a pressing need to have an entity outside India, but and if we take care of these things, it would help the business in the long run. If you have any questions, you can let me know and we can take it forward. So I think Pallav has a question about high level cost involved in setting up. So I think Pallav, we can discuss the details and cost offline, because there are various aspects involved in creating a Singapore entity. If we want a local director, or we already have a director over there, uh, what kind of business lines the company would be, what kind of registration it would require. So depending upon that, the cost would vary. So, but yeah, setting up would cost anywhere between 5,000 to 6,000 Singaporean dollar in general. So any other questions any of our attendees is having? So I think all good for now. So thank you everyone for joining, and for any queries, any concerns, any further questions, you can reach out to us, info@taxmantra.com, and we'll be more than happy to help you through this. Or you can reach out to you can reach out to our website or call our toll-free number or WhatsApp at our number, and we can keep in touch and take things forward. So thanks everyone for joining.